hounds, chase ghosts, come sleep, watch out, demons are coming, run, sleep, hide, spirits, ghosts, hide, demons, hounds, ghosts, demons are coming.
Welcome home, my little hellhounds. I would like to say thank you to all of the authors who make these videos possible. Tonight we have 4 scary stories to sink our hellish teeth into. Don't forget to subscribe if you're new, it would be awesome. And don't forget to like the video, as this really helps the channel. Also make sure to click that bell icon so you get notified every time I upload. If you have any stories you want narrated on the channel, then submit them to Reddit r/homeofscares. I will put the link in the description, and follow me on Twitter at homeofscares. And I would like to wish everybody a happy new year and stay safe. Now let's get right into it. Running with a Cult, posted by TARDIS Tree. Whenever I have been around people in my work industry, we always hear of the horror stories of crazy cults, people getting paid for weird requests and such, but I've never thought with my luck I'd have to worry about being in one of these stories. Man, was I wrong. This is probably going to be a mini-series since it's a bit long. For some background, I am a very much introverted person. I don't go out much. If it's outside of my small group of friends. I started doing OnlyFans around this time, where it was very popular in quarantine. I had already been on FetLife, which is a fetish-based network like Facebook, but for the kink community. So I was thinking doing OnlyFans wouldn't be too hard, considering I was already involved in the kink community because of my work at the adult store and my time on FetLife. Usually with friend requests, I don't normally accept them if I don't know the person in real life, due to past events of issues online. My red flag radar was fairly used to sensing something was off if I was in danger. However, this time it was a silent danger I wasn't prepared for. I had begun posting regular content on my account and was told to make a Twitter for a following fan base for my work, which made sense at the time. I was fairly new to the idea of it. I was logged into my Fet to check my messages for the day, and a new friend request popped up with a message. "Thank you, TARDIS Tree, for for taking the time to read my message. I'm Wolfie. I am excited to help you with your OnlyFans because I see you have potential and I can help. Please feel free to message if interested in working together, Wolfie. I wasn't sure why the message came off so proper with the tagline of something to the effect of "Join us." It's been a few months, so my memory is a bit fuzzy to all the exact message details because I mainly wanted to block out as much as I could. I started looking at the profile to see if I would find any reasons not to add them to my account because I was fairly new to having people I didn't know as friends. I saw he was in a pack with several women in all the different age groups and that we all had an OnlyFans and modelling in common, which wasn't something that was alarming to me. I added him back and shortly after that began the introduction into the cult. I slowly started getting more messages in my inbox about how they could help me because I was now one of the pack. I didn't think it meant anything more than being friendly. Something in the back of my mind was telling me to be careful. But stupid is as stupid does, and I paid it no mind. I wish I had now in retrospect. When I was at work, Wolfie would blow up my inbox with messages saying he added me to a group on Twitter that was special because it had all of our pages in it, and we had to do a chain of if one girl posted about her OF, we had to share it and keep the pack happy, which seemed harmless. That became an every hour a new post was made and we had to share and do the same in return for hours. I thought this was normal for Twitter because I hardly ever use it. I was put in two chats, the main chat and the one with just Wolfie and his wife, because she wanted to see if I was a good match for their pack. He would often send me photos of them in bed and say things like, "One day you will be in the middle of us, where you belong." Mind you, I am in a relationship with my partner of 8 years at this point, so I wasn't sure if he was just kidding or not. He would send me messages of him telling me how to post my pages, my photos, and any time I had updated my FetLife with new modelling photos. He was the first to comment, "This is my cub. Appreciate her or I'll end you." Things of that nature. I get the whole being an alpha, but it was just getting creepy to me that just seconds after my post went live, it was already getting attention. To my knowledge, there isn't a way to get notifications of someone's posts on that specific site, like Twitter, unless he had my page open, waiting. I started to feel more strange vibes when he started sending me messages via his wife and her telling me someday we were all going to get a place in the middle of nowhere. No one would find us and we'd all do sex work together and live together in this wolf alpha based lifestyle, which sounds like a cult now that I'm actually writing this. There were 4 other girls that were all doing the same thing, listening and doing everything their alpha said. A few days went by and Wolfie started really making me feel incredibly uncomfortable with anything that this was. He did a posted writing of his own on his page and made sure to tell me in the group that I was his favourite new little cub, and this was for my own good. The writing was about how he loved me and told me to be in his outfit and wait in my room for him. He snuck into my apartment and attacked my partner, beat him close to death and brought him up to my room. He wrote I had to choose who I loved more. He wrote I chose him over my partner, and that he then dominated me and killed my partner, and I was stolen away to live with him and his pack forever. My stomach had dropped out of my body as I reread the story he had created. The details of my apartment he couldn't possibly know. The things about my home nobody knew unless they were in my home scared me. I was on edge for days because I didn't have a clue how he knew these details. My skin was crawling. I told him I didn't know how I felt of the story he fantasized about me in his world. I knew this was it. It was the reason I had to run. I had to take a break to finish the end of this story because of how creepy it is for me to have to write and relive everything because it's terrifying. Wolfie kept showing the rest of his pack the story and had me under his list of relationships on his submissive and in a poly relationship with him and his wife. My skin for days was crawling with the fear of me not knowing how he knew all those things he knew, not knowing how he knew all the things he knew. I never posted about my home. He saw a post of me in a bad mood from a disagreement, but that wasn't cause for him to write a fantasized life of murder and rape and such, was it? The rest of that week I wore oversized clothes and cried on and off because I was terrified to be alone in my apartment. I showed my partner and friend, and they both agreed that this was not something I would be able to handle on my own. I took myself out of the groups on Twitter for a start and tried not to draw attention to Wolfie when the girls started messaging me out of the blue saying they didn't understand why I wanted to be brainwashed by my partner and they loved me and everything would be fine if I went with them. I deleted my Twitter and also my OnlyFans because I didn't know what they could find on me. I blocked them all on my new accounts, and I also took down my profile on FetLife and made a new one with a completely different name and credentials so they couldn't find me. I even changed my number because Wolfie found out what it was to try and get me to talk to him and explain why I was pulling away. I made new accounts and made sure everyone was aware that needed to know about this potential stalker so I could maintain my sanity. I thought it was over, then a week had passed and I didn't see any new messages on my new profile on FetLife or my messages. Man, was I wrong. My best friend had checked her messages on Instagram, where of course he found me via her. He asked if she knew where I was and if I was okay, because I disappeared out of nowhere. I thought I had escaped the nightmare. I went to my Instagram. I had made and had a few different messages from him about him coming to get me, to rescue me and save me. I was terrified. How far would this guy go for me? Why couldn't he just leave me alone? I blocked him again and countless times of changing my names and such. I had finally reached a point of just getting into the habit of bringing my knife to work in my boots and locking my deadbolt when I was alone because I didn't want to be afraid anymore. This was almost a month of me being terrified out of my mind. I made one last post on my FetLife about him so all my following could see I was in real danger and I was done being afraid, and openly said if they were wanting to come for me I'd be ready with law enforcement and such. Thankfully, after that post was made public, I went to check his profile to see if it was still up, and it was gone. It's been a few months since this has happened, and thank God I haven't had any weird messages or my friends getting anything weird from this whole thing. I wish I would have listened to my intuition about this in the first place. Maybe then it could have been avoided. Thankfully, I am safe from this insane wolf pack cult. Glass Eye, posted by Bloody Spaghetti. I fucking hate children. Call me what you will, think whatever you want, but children are the worst kind of people. They're loud, irritating, disgusting, little sacks of snot and tears. Occasionally, they also reek of biological waste, not to mention they're completely incapable of handling themselves, for the most part, that is. Some children are fairly adult-like, however rare that might be. Sadly, that's the type of kid is the one you'd never want to meet. As nice as that kind of kid sounds, they're probably the worst breed. I doubt anyone enjoys seeing a kid who was forced to grow up way too fast because of abuse, loss, or any other unpleasant experience. My hatred of children is mostly limited to the really young ones. They're just so vile. I must have been 12 or 13 when that happened. I wasn't a very social kid myself and preferred to keep to myself. Back then, I lived in a small town, bushes on all sides surrounding my house, with a small opening leading to a long and winding road. That road led to out of our small town. The traffic was fairly scarce on that road, so you could travel on it safely by foot. My dad made a swing he had hung up from the tree next to our house. I spent my afternoon swinging on that swing most days, daydreaming. That day I must have been caught up in my fantasies because I didn't notice the battered kid that smelled like used diapers approaching. His sobbing only became audible when he was already standing right next to the swing. The smell hit me right after. I heard his pained cries and turned to look at him. His blood-stained, pale little face and tattered clothes made him look like a zombified thing. I nearly fell off the swing when I noticed just how bad he looked. My first reaction was to curse, and then I became worried about the kid. He was visibly younger than me. He might have been 6 or 7. Looked like he hadn't eaten in a few weeks and was run over by a truck. I remember trying to gauge out what had happened to him, but to no avail. He only stood there, sobbed and shook. After a few frustrating minutes, I figured out what had happened. He and his father were involved in an accident down the road. The car flipped over. His father was trapped and asleep, as he put it. I figured his father must have been hurt, so I wanted to get help. To do that, I asked him to show me where it had happened, and he led me down the road. After about 15 minutes of walking in awkward silence with a kid that looked like a zombie who shit himself, we finally reached our destination. A lone car stood on its side at the side of the road. I told the kid to stay there and promised to get back with help. I ran back to town and alerted the first adult I could find, my school guard, Mr. Barsanian, a middle-aged man whose first name I never learned. He might have been past his prime, but he was built like a tank. I figured he'd help me. We ran back to the place I had left the kid. Much to my surprise, the kid lay on the ground motionless. Back then I had no idea a person could die from injuries in a matter of minutes if they're left untreated. I was panicking. I didn't want the kid or his father to die. I started crying, pleading with Mr. Barsanian to help them both, and he told me that he'll do whatever he can. He told me to stay put and went to check on the kid. Placing his fingers on the kid's neck, the child sprang back to life, spat something red into Mr. Barsanian's face, causing the middle-aged school guard to stumble back and wipe his face vigorously. Before I could do anything, a pale, lanky, tattooed figure rose from behind the car. It was a tall man. He had the vilest face I had ever seen. Yellow teeth shone from behind his devious smile. His sunken eyes were yellowish in shade as well. Mr. Barsanian stumbled around blindly, shouting profanities. The lanky man pulled out a weapon of some kind and smashed it against Mr. Barsanian's leg, causing the middle-aged man yelled out in pain as he fell down. The lanky man stood over him, casting a predatory shadow. He was swaying from side to side. He could barely maintain his balance on his feet. I screamed in terror as the lanky man grinned from ear to ear. His smile was almost inhuman. Mr. Barsanian saw me and yelled at me to run. I ran. I hadn't got far before I lost my footing. I ended up landing on my head and cutting my scalp. A pulsating pain radiated across my head as I tried getting back up. Looking behind me one last time, I saw that kid getting back up to his feet, clutching something in his hand. He looked at me and waved his hand. I barely made it home. My clothes were covered in my blood, and I couldn't bring myself to say a word. I didn't speak for months. I was too scared to speak. The visual of that kid standing up, waving at me, coupled with the agonised screaming of Mr. Barsanian, haunted me. It's still a very painful memory, like a terrible nightmare that extended into my consciousness after I've woken up. My parents were sure it was the blow to the head, and my dad took off the swing, assuming I had busted my scalp falling from the swing. I must have left blood marks all over that thing. They found Mr. Barsanian's remains dumped at the side of the road the next day when he failed to show up for work. His body was broken and bloodied. I didn't tell anyone anything about the incident. The man and the kid were never found. I couldn't look at my brother the same after that day. He reminded me of that little fucker who used me as bait. I hate kids to this day because that little shit scared me more than his old man. Who wouldn't be scarred by the sight of an evil little kid with a visible empty eye socket? I was so freaked out by that little fucker waving his eye at me. I had no clue glass eyes were a thing back then. Abandoned in the operating room. Posted by MTP6921. As a little girl, the only thing I ever wanted to be was a trauma surgeon. My dad would watch the television show MASH pretty much 24/7, which kind of grew on me. I loved watching the excitement and suspense of knowing that I could save someone's life. When I finished my premed program at the University of Pennsylvania, I was overjoyed when Penn accepted me into their med school program. Being in med school was grueling because it really was the survival of the fittest. Nobody cared if I was exhausted from studying 20 hours straight. Then I had to shadow some hardened physician who thought I was nothing more but in their way. I'm a non-aggressive female who is very non-confrontational. I would rather calmly talk my way out of something than get into a yelling match. So I struggled in my medical school in dealing with high-strung male physicians. I never understood the reason for their hostility. Perhaps they really didn't like being doctors themselves, or because they thought new emerging students like myself were a threat to them. I didn't know the reason for their hostility towards me, but it didn't matter because I couldn't fight back, and they would fail me if I did. Medical school had taken at least 10 years of my life, but I finished the program. I managed to drag myself across the finish line. This is something that I wanted since I was 5 years old, and now I sign my name, Sarah Balmer, MD. My dad was so proud of me. We both cried and hugged each other during my graduation ceremony. I was grateful towards him. From all the times a washed up old doctor would yell and scream at me, and my dad always encouraged me to not drop out. I chose to be a surgical intern. The hostility had really increased at this point. I was now doing actual surgeries and not watching. I tried my best to tune out a surgeon throwing something at the wall in anger, or watching a nurse being belittled. It seemed like the younger surgeons didn't have these behaviours, but the older ones had adopted it as part of their personalities. The day after day onslaught of hostility was starting to take its toll on me. I had made it a point to jog as much as possible. I couldn't drink alcohol because I always needed to be on my toes. As a first year intern, I always had to prove myself to be able to continue on as a resident physician. Any insults I received from my senior male counterparts, I just acknowledged it and I didn't argue back. I was too exhausted to even cry at night when I got home. When my head would hit the pillow, my brain would just spin out of control with all the second guessing from the surgeries I performed earlier in the day. I managed to get through my internship, and now I am a resident. As much as I despised the aggressive male doctors continually belittling me, at times I knew I needed them to step in when my patients went south. However, now as a resident, there was no more crying for help. If someone died on the operating table, it would be because of me. The buck stopped with me. I wanted to be a trauma surgeon, and my wish had finally become true. A gunshot wound, then a ruptured aorta, then a motorcycle accident victim. The cases never stopped, and I had to be on my toes for each one. Every surgery I was the picture with 2 outs and a full count. One wrong move and I would blow the World Series, or in this case, cause someone to die. I finished my residency program and was offered a position at St. Joseph's Hospital, which was in the heart of urban Philadelphia. I would work my shifts Monday through Friday and would be on call on weekends. The hospital was not doing well financially, and the seasoned surgeons were starting to quit. They weren't happy with their reimbursements based on the amount of surgeries they were performing. I dreaded going to the medical staff meetings with the rest of the surgeons because the males would just yell and scream at the hospital administrators. To make things worse, if I didn't take the surgeon's side, then I was looked at as a scab. I did have a huge amount of loans, but I wasn't interested or concerned about making money. I never wanted the newest car or the nicest house, and my mentality didn't change when I became a surgeon. I just didn't care about those things. I knew most surgeons had put a dollar amount on each patient that came into the operating room, but I never had that mentality. My satisfaction came from saving people's lives and not the money. The monthly meetings had turned into weekly meetings. The hospital was in dire straits financially, and the other surgeons were close to walking out. The meetings turned into yelling matches, where the male surgeons would come close to fighting the hospital administrators. I remember the last meeting we had on February 28th, 2020, when I knew things had reached the boiling point. The administrators had mentally checked out. Bankruptcy was looming, and they just tuned out the surgeons. Every surgeon had handed in their pages that day. They had all decided to quit. After weeks of threatening to quit, this day they had finally done so. I was stunned. My shift was starting in 5 minutes. I was assured by the head administrator that surgeons from different hospitals would come relieve me. I was scheduled from 1 p.m. to 11 p.m. It was a typical day of car accidents and emergency heart surgeries. As 11 p.m. got close, I got the sinking feeling that no one was going to come to relieve me from the operating room. Unfortunately, I was right. It was 11:30 p.m. and there was no end in sight. I worked through the early morning. I would take a nap whenever I could in between the trauma arrivals. I would call the administrator, and he continuously told me he was working on getting a surgeon to relieve me. Then things went from bad to unbearable. The hospital was in panic mode from the emergence of COVID-19. Though I was stuck in the operating room by myself for 2 whole days now, all of the attention in the hospital was focused on the really sick patients arriving in the emergency room. We didn't know much about this virus, and we were all given N95 masks to help filter the air. I was coming up to my 4th day now with no relief in sight. Every time I would think that maybe I could go home, a trauma victim would present to the emergency room. I was just beyond exhaustion, and now I can't breathe through this mask. I had to give each patient my utmost care and attention. It's like going through a McDonald's drive-through where nobody cares if so and so called out. that people just want their food to be fast and done right, and it was the same thing with me. The critical patient's family members didn't want to hear that I couldn't perform the surgery because I was too exhausted. They presented to the hospital expecting a service, and it was my job to deliver that service. I was just completely forgotten in the operating room. The nursing staff was doing fine. They had a pool of on-call nurses. I was trying to take all the negative experiences going through med school, then as an intern and then as a resident, to help guide me through this. If I could deal with some 50-year-old hothead male throwing scalpels at me, then I could deal with this current situation. I tried calling each surgeon who quit, but none of them answered my calls. I was the stupid one who showed up when all the other surgeons walked out. Now, if I leave, I would be considered abandoning my patients. When I would finish stitching up one person's chest, then I would hear a message that the next trauma victim was on their way. I had 2 minutes to spare, so I walked through the hospital. It was just mass chaos. The hallways were filled with patients who couldn't breathe. I saw the administrator absolutely overwhelmed in the ICU, trying to calm the nurses from walking out from a lack of ventilators. It just felt like a balloon that was going to pop with one more breath of air. There was no one for me to complain to. We are a small, standalone hospital that typically overshadowed by the bigger city hospitals. I knew there was no escape for me in sight. There was no way I was leaving this place anytime soon. It's now been a week and I haven't been able to leave. I nap in the locker room any chance I get. I take showers and I just put new scrubs on. I try not to call my dad because I don't want to worry him. I tried calling every hospital, but they couldn't offer me any assistance. I wish the hospital would just go out of business and shut its doors. I just want to get out of here. The administrator had come to see me a few times and never has any promising news to tell me. It's just empty because that someone is going to come relieve me. But I know there's no one because the administrator tells them the current problem with staffing in the operating room, so the potential surgeon knows that they wouldn't be able to leave like me. The financial problems had been leaked out to the community, so surgeons were also leery of potentially not getting paid. I started using the veterinarian nurses as first assist surgeon. I would have them finish up stitching patients when I felt the patients were stable enough to do so. At this point I really just wanted to be infected with the COVID, because then I would have an excuse to stop working. But I just couldn't take off my mask, because then I would be putting the patients at risk who were in bad shape to begin with. Just when I thought things couldn't get worse, it did. It seemed like there were less and less surgical nurses showing up. They had their gripes like the surgeons did, and now they had reached their boiling points. I haven't left this hospital in 2 weeks now. I had called EMS and told them to stop sending patients, but because it's a neighbourhood hospital, the trauma victims would just show up. I'm with one other nurse who can't stop coughing I know that she is infected with COVID. She has to leave. I am now all alone. The surgical suite consists of no one but me. I have no one to get me a scalpel or an IV bag. It's just me. My face feels like it's been torn off from wearing the mask all the time. I have now crossed over to the twilight zone. There is no one for me to call. The nursing units are on the verge of collapse. The surgical suite is dark and eerie. I am breaking all the rules by not having an anesthesiologist in the operating room with me, because the contracted anesthesiology group had stopped coming once they stopped getting paid by the hospital. Anyone who needs emergency surgery, I continually inject them with the propofol and pain meds. Anyone who could be transferred to another hospital's operating room, then I tell the ED to transfer them. But anyone who arrives to the hospital in severe trauma situations, then I have to try to stabilize them, or else they will just die. There is no one in the operating room but just me. A heart surgery that would require 5 people is reduced to just me. I swear I can hear other people in the operating room with me, but besides the critical patient, I'm the only other person. I'm starting to get paranoid from not being able to sleep for more than 2 consecutive hours. My body and mind have just given up. I can't breathe from wearing the N95 mask, and coffee is no longer working. An emergency room nurse rushes a patient to the operating room, then leaves. The guy has a gunshot wound to his stomach. This is my 3rd consecutive surgery in a row. I was just about to pass out on the locker room bench, but now I can't. The main operating room light has went out and there are only auxiliary lights on now. I try to stop myself from talking to imaginary people in the room. I try everything to stay focused on this dying person in front of me, who is bleeding profusely in front of me. I just started laughing. I see myself at a Rodney Dangerfield concert that my dad used to watch on TV. I go back and forth from laughing to being focused on stopping this patient's bleeding. I inject the patient with more propofol, then I start laughing as I walk to get the sutures. I go to the open glass enclosed supply cabinet and I see my reflection, and I just break down in laughter. I try my hardest to stay focused, but my body is overrun with just pure exhaustion. I pull myself together and stitch this patient back together. I wheel him on the gurney to the ED. I tell the nurse to transfer the resident now to a different hospital because he's stable now. The nurse says okay, and I just start breaking out in laughter and start singing, well, okay, okay, well, okay, okay, well, okay, okay. Nobody laughs along with me. I can barely stand up. I stumble back to the surgical suite as if I was drunk. I put my back against the wall and slide to the floor. I now picture myself in elementary school, talking to the kids around me. I have lost my grip on reality from exhaustion and sleep deprivation. I look down the hallway and I wave to kids that I haven't seen in 20 years. I close my eyes for a minute. Then I hear through the loudspeaker that a level 5 trauma patient had arrived in the ED. I lie on my side, on the ground, and with my finger I start drawing imaginary shapes while I giggle to myself. I hear a train coming and I start giggling and saying, choo choo, chugga chug chug, choo choo. The train sounds closer and closer, and I see it come through the surgical suite. The train stops beside me, and I squint my eyes. As I squint my eyes, I see an ED nurse in a hyper state alongside a patient on a stretcher. She is urging me to get off the floor by continuously moving her arms towards herself. It looks like she's doing a Hawaiian luau, so I start laughing again. As the nurse continuously moves her arms toward herself, I can start to hear her say, "Get up," in a slow, monotone tone. Then she says she's going to die. Come on, get up. I sit myself up there for a few seconds in a trance-like state. Then the nurse grabs me beneath both of my armpits and tries to lift me from the floor. I start to regain my senses and I say, no, I can't. I feel like I just went through 12 rounds with Mike Tyson in his prime. The nurse says, you have to, she is going to die. The nurse sits me in a wheelchair and I say, push me to the med room. In the med room I give her my hospital ID with the barcode and I tell her to get Ritalin from the electronic dispensing unit. I tell her to give me 150 milligrams, which is 5 times the typical dose. The nurse quickly crushes 2 of the pills and I snort them, which is something that I have never done before. Then I orally ingest the rest of the pills. I get that jolt of energy that makes me coherent and gives me enough energy, though I feel like utter crap from the lack of sleep and exhaustion. I feel like I drank 2 bottles of vodka last night. I tell the nurse to stay and help me, and she reluctantly obliges. We bring the patient into the operating room and I instruct the nurse to sanitize her hands by scrubbing in. I tell her to get me things as I sedate the patient. I feel like I'm going to die at any moment. The patient has a ruptured spleen from a car accident, so I cut her open and stop the bleeding. The nurse starts to see me drift off and she says, the ED is closing today. This will be the last patient. Please pull yourself together. I regain my consciousness and hurry to stitch the patient up. I tell the nurse to call EMS to transfer the patient out because she is stable now. As the nurse wheels the patient away, I collapse on the floor. I wake up 2 days later in the same spot on the operating room floor. I am completely dehydrated from not drinking and my muscles hurt as I attempt to move. I find apple juice and I drink as much as possible. I slowly walk out of the surgical suite in a zombie-like state. My muscles ache in horrific pain. I try to open one of the exit doors and it's locked. I slowly move around the hospital and I realise that all the patients had been transferred out and the ED is closed. I stand by the ED door for a minute in disbelief that the entire hospital has been abandoned. Then I see a fire extinguisher on the wall encased in glass. I get the fire extinguisher and bash the sliding doors of the ED. Eventually the door shatters and I go outside This is the first time that I have been freed from the hospital in weeks. I go to my car, which is the only one in the parking lot. I don't know why the car wasn't towed away. I think the administrator and everyone else just locked the doors and didn't look back. Amazingly, the car's battery works. I drive to my dad's house and he greets me as I come in. I lay down on his couch and I start hysterically crying as I feel a large burden that had been lifted off my shoulders. Be careful of your child's online virtual learning. Posted by MTP 6921. My pharmaceutical company transferred me to Bucks County, Pennsylvania in June 2020. Reluctantly, I uprooted my 11-year-old daughter Grace from Atlanta, Georgia, and the both of us moved to Pennsylvania because of the pandemic. Grace stayed in the house all summer. My pharmaceutical company was doing well, which unfortunately had me working a lot of hours, so I didn't spend as much time with Grace as I hoped. I wanted Grace to be enrolled in the 6th grade, so I went to the school's district's administration offices. As I pulled up to the school office, a man with a shirt and tie was outside the building with a laptop and said that the building was closed because of the pandemic. I told him about needing to enroll Grace, and he was able to do it on his laptop. He asked me to send Grace's prior school information from Georgia from my email account. The process was easier than I thought it would be. I really just needed to show proof of local residency. I also learned that for at least the next 4 months, all of Grace's classes will be online. This was unfortunate because Grace wouldn't be able to meet any new friends by not being able to go to school in person. I set Grace's room up with a desk and a chair for online school. The first day of school came in September, and I followed all the email links that were sent to me to get Grace situated at the laptop that I gave her. I let Grace use my laptop that I used in Georgia prior to moving to Pennsylvania. I had to go to work during the first day of school, so I got Grace situated and ran out of the house so I wouldn't be late for work. I texted her a couple of times and she stated that she was doing fine. The days turned into weeks and Grace wasn't having any issues. I would get weekly emails from her teacher regarding Grace's status. Fortunately, the teacher said Grace was progressing normally with no issues. Grace's mother died unexpectedly when she was 2, so knowing that she was doing good with the online schooling was a big relief. One Sunday in late November, Grace decided that she wanted to go shopping at the King of Prussia Mall. The mall was completely decked out with Christmas apparel. The mall had temporary vendors located outside of the fixed department stores. Occasionally one of the temporary vendors would guilt you to look at their merchandise with the hope that you'll buy something. As we walked past this one vendor, Grace said, "Dad, hold on. Look how cool these are. I'm going to buy one." What caught her eye was Russian nesting figurines, the kind that were made up of some type of wood, where the smaller figurine fits inside the larger ones. She had her own allowance money, so she could buy whatever she wanted. She took out a $20 bill from her pocket and handed it over to the vendor. The vendor had a thick Eastern European accent and gave her $5 back and said, "Blagadori ru vas, thank you." The one thing that caught my eye was, I swore Grace had some type of small SD storage card device in her pocket that she simultaneously handed the vendor with the $20 bill. I knew I saw something, but I didn't want to ruin the moment, and I wasn't 100% sure that I had seen her hand him something. Quite frankly, I was more in shock than anything else. My daughter is 11 years old. I kept asking myself, why would she hand some 50-year unknown stranger a storage device? Grace and I continued to walk around and left the store. About an hour later, during the car ride home, I asked Grace, "So tell me, how's school's going?" Grace said, "It's fine." I then asked, "What subjects do you have?" Grace replied, "History, social studies, maths, Russian." I said, "You're learning Russian in the 6th grade. That's a little odd. What about the typical Spanish or French?" Grace said, "Well, Dad, we learned that there is a large amount of people from Russia in this part of Pennsylvania, so my school thought it would be good to learn the language." I then said, "Oh, well, that makes sense. So what are you learning about in history?" Grace said, "Right now we're learning about the Russian Revolution, including Lenin and Stalin." I responded, "Just this week?" Grace responded, "No, pretty much from the beginning of the school year." I then said, "Anything about Washington or Jefferson or Martin Luther King Jr.?" Grace responded, "No, Dad, just about different Russian people." I felt like I was completely out of the loop. I never bothered to ask her what she was actually learning. I was just so caught up in my job, and when I got the emails from the school that Grace was doing good, I just kind of tuned out her actual schoolwork. Everything that happened today was very alarming to me, with the vendor in the mall, Grace's Russian learning studies, so much so that I brought a camera from Amazon to monitor her online classes. The camera came the following Wednesday, and I installed it late Wednesday night in Grace's room, in a concealed area where she couldn't see it. I could view the recording from my cell phone, and I was shocked at what I discovered the next day. I witnessed via the camera Grace being indoctrinated into some kind of Russian cult following. They had Grace completely brainwashed. I even saw her take a SD card out of the smallest Russian nestled figurine and copy something from her laptop. This is when I really started having doubts that Grace was part of the school district. I think Grace was being used as some type of pawn, and I had completely been duped. For the heck of it, I actually called the school district to ask a question about Grace, and they had zero information on her. I put 2 and 2 together and figured whoever I met in the school's parking lot was just waiting for an unsuspecting idiot like me. I thought the best thing to do was email Grace's teacher and say the school district has no information on Grace, and because of that, what are they doing with my daughter every day? I sent the email, and an hour later I got a response to go to the homepage of Grace's laptop and look under a file called Fired. So I left work a little early that day at about 3 PM and checked Grace's computer. that I had given her, and I opened the file name Fired. Once I opened the file, I knew exactly what I was looking at. I had erased all the work files from the laptop prior to giving it to Grace, but I stupidly didn't empty the recycling bin. The information on those files were potential patient secrets that my company had been working on for years, and I would truly get fired if this information was given to a pharmaceutical competitor. I sat at my daughter's desk with both hands on top of my head, pulling out my hair. I had no idea of what to do now. This time I received a text from the unknown teacher who said, "Pretty interesting information in that file, huh?" I then replied, "What do you want from us?" Instead of texting back, I received a phone call from a number I wasn't aware of. I picked up the phone and the caller said, "Mr. Koch." I replied, "What do you want from us?" He replied, "Oh, a man who gets right to the point." I could hear a light Eastern European accent in his tone. Then he said, "I need your daughter to make one more exchange, and in return, I will disappear from your life." I said, "Where is this exchange going to happen?" He told me, "Don't worry about it. The information will be given to Grace, and if in any way you compromise this exchange, then at the very minimum, your work information will be disclosed to your competitors." Once again, this will be at the very minimum of what will happen. I replied, "When will this be over?" He replied, "If you and your daughter do everything that I tell you to do, then within the next few days. Just remember what I told you, that if you compromise the exchange in any way by going to the authorities, then I will never go away. Bye, Mr. Koch." It didn't take a genius to figure out that Grace was being used as a go-between for some type of Eastern European terrorist ring. If they were to communicate directly with each other, then every US counterintelligence agency would know the terrorist links within the country. So to get around this, they are using an 11-year-old girl who is the furthest from being on anybody's radar. I am now more in fear for Grace's safety than losing my job. I look online about past scenarios of dealings with the Russians. Then it came to passing information. I was sweating as I read each story because it seemed like the Russians sever all ties with the mule once they're done with them, which is usually done with cyanide poisoning, so there would be no witnesses and no trace of linking the Russian operatives. As I sat at Grace's desk, I can hear her in the living room watching television. I went through all the different options in my head of what I should do. I kept slightly hitting my forehead with the ball of my fist. I knew that I couldn't leave Grace home alone anymore. I knew that the Russian operatives had more information on me regarding my name, social security number, everywhere that I previously lived, and so on. I thought to myself that even if Grace followed exactly what they wanted, then we would either be killed or the rest of our lives we would be looking over our shoulders. Both Grace and I saw the man at the mall already, so we knew more information than we should know. I remembered seeing those billboards. If you see or know something suspicious, then call the 1-800 number. So I figured I would block my phone number and call the number. I found the 1-800 number online and I called it. Without giving away any personal identifying information, I told the person of the situation. I was transferred several times until I actually spoke to someone from the CIA. The person's name was Agent Hebert, who worked out of the Philadelphia field office. I once again explained the scenario without giving away any personal identifying information. The agent was aware of these types of scenarios where terrorists would use virtually anyone as an unknowing carrier. Agent Hebert advised me to basically leave the house with my daughter right now. As Agent Hebert said that, I received a text from the Russian operative that said, "Look out your daughter's window. Do you see that white van?" I felt my stomach hit the floor when I saw the van parked in front of my house, with two men sitting in the driver and passenger seats. I am now terrified that my house will be bombarded with terrorists at any moment. I responded back, "Yeah, what do you want?" He texted back, "I told you to keep your mouth shut. You're a stupid man. Don't you realise the laptop has a built-in microphone? I heard all of your conversations with the US government officials." I hung up the phone with Agent Hebert and I started hitting my head with my fist because I did do something stupid by not leaving my daughter's room when I called the government officials. The Russian operative then called me. I answered the phone and he said, "Mr. Koch, you have 30 seconds to do exactly what I tell you to do. Grab the Russian figurines that your daughter bought at the mall and go to the mall and return it to the same vendor. Your daughter stays in the house." Then he hung up the phone. I ran towards my daughter in the living room and I said, "Go put your jacket on and go out through the back basement door and run to the park where I will meet you in 1 minute. Grace said, "Why, Daddy?" I said, "Honey, please, just do it." Grace was completely oblivious to everything that was happening. She's just a kid whose teacher was telling her to do stuff which she thought all kids her age were doing. I went out the front door and the two men in the white van watched me as I held the wooden figurines in my hand. My only chance was that they thought that Grace was still in the house. I got in my car and drove away towards the park. I cried in relief when I saw her waiting for me. I proceeded with Grace to the mall, which was about a 25-minute drive. The whole drive, I had both hands tightly gripped on the steering wheel. I was dripping sweat from absolute fear I was experiencing. I was looking in the rear view mirror the whole time to see if I was being followed. Other than saying, "Dad, why did I have to run to the park?" Grace just sat and played with her phone the whole drive. I responded to Grace just because. I pulled into the King of Prussia mall and parked. I figured it was best to have Grace stay in the fragrance aisle of Macy's, where there were always a ton of people around, while I went to return the Russian figurines. I really didn't want to leave Grace alone, but I really had no other option. I quickly walked over to the vendor with the figurine. I said, "I want to return this." He took the figurine and attempted to give me my money back, which I declined because I didn't know if cyanide or some other poison was on it. Then I quickly walked back to Macy's and I cried in relief when I saw Grace standing by the fragrances playing with her phone. We both headed to my car. As I drove away, I said, "Give me your phone." Grace handed me her phone and I threw it out the window. Grace got upset, so I gave her my phone. I had to assume her teacher was going to text her eventually. About 5 minutes later, Grace said, "Daddy, you just got a message from my teacher, Mr. Gorski." I then took my phone and threw it out the window. My grandparents owned a cabin in the middle of nowhere in Georgia, so I got on 95 South and headed in that direction. And that's it for tonight, my little hellhounds. Thanks for listening. And remember to subscribe and like the video and click that bell icon. If you have any stories you would like narrated on the channel, then submit them to Reddit r/homeofscares. And follow me on Twitter @homeofscares. Now, Happy New Year, my hellhounds.